A perfect evening interrupted. The candlelight danced across the white tablecloth as Natalie Brooks took another sip of her wine. The restaurant was everything she had imagined. Soft jazz music floated through the air, and the view of Boston Harbor sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her date, Ryan Fletcher, sat across from her, talking about his latest case with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved his work. Natalie smiled and nodded, but her mind kept wandering. This was their third date in 2 weeks, and while Ryan was nice, intelligent, and definitely handsome in his tailored suit, something felt missing. There was no spark, no moment that made her heart skip. Just comfortable conversation and polite laughter. "So what do you think?" Ryan asked, pulling her back to the present. "I'm sorry, what?" Natalie felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Ryan laughed good-naturedly. "I asked if you wanted to share the chocolate dessert, unless you'd prefer something else." "The chocolate sounds perfect," Natalie replied, grateful he hadn't noticed her distraction. The waiter appeared to take their dessert order, and Natalie found herself studying Ryan's profile as he spoke. He really was attractive, with his dark hair and warm brown eyes. Her best friend Jade had set them up, insisting that Natalie needed to stop spending every evening at the gallery and actually live a little. "You work too hard," Jade had said, while practically pushing Natalie out the door for their first date. "Ryan is stable, successful, and he doesn't have any crazy ex-girlfriends. That's winning the lottery in Boston dating." The billionaire arrives. The restaurant door opened, bringing a gust of cool October air and a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Natalie noticed several heads turn, including their waiters, as a tall figure entered. The man moved with quiet confidence, his presence commanding attention without seeming to try. Blake Montgomery. Natalie recognized him instantly, though she'd only met him once at a charity auction 3 months ago. He was hard to forget. At 35, Blake had built a technology empire that revolutionized renewable energy storage. His face regularly appeared in business magazines, usually accompanied by words like visionary, innovative, and frustratingly. Most eligible bachelor, their brief conversation at the auction had been about art. Blake had purchased one of the paintings Natalie had recommended, a stunning landscape by an emerging artist she'd been championing. He'd asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to her answers, which was rare in her experience with wealthy collectors, who usually just wanted to hear that their purchases would increase in value. Now, as Blake's eyes scanned the restaurant, they landed on Natalie. His expression shifted from polite interest to genuine recognition, and to her surprise, he began walking directly toward their table. "Oh no," Natalie whispered under her breath. "What's wrong?" Ryan asked, turning to follow her gaze. "An unwelcome interruption, Natalie Brooks," Blake said as he reached their table, his voice warm and familiar. "What a pleasant surprise." Natalie felt her pulse quicken, though she couldn't explain why. "Mr. Montgomery, hello, please, it's Blake." He smiled, and Natalie noticed the way it reached his eyes, creating small lines at the corners. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." Ryan cleared his throat pointedly, and Natalie quickly made introductions. "Blake Montgomery. This is Ryan Fletcher." "Ryan, this is Blake. We met at a charity event a few months ago." The two men shook hands with the careful politeness of dogs circling each other. Blake's handshake was firm but brief, his attention returning quickly to Natalie. "I've been meaning to contact you," Blake said, seemingly oblivious to Ryan's growing discomfort. "That painting you recommended, the landscape by the young artist from Maine, it's become my favorite piece." "I'm so glad," Natalie replied, genuinely pleased. She took pride in matching art with collectors who would appreciate it. "In fact, I'd love to discuss a potential project with you. Would you have time this week to meet?" Ryan's fork clinked against his plate a bit too forcefully. "We're actually in the middle of dinner," he said, his tone polite but strained. Blake finally seemed to register the situation fully. "Of course, my apologies. I got carried away." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, placing it on the table near Natalie. "My personal number is on there. Please call me when you have a chance. It's rather important." The aftermath. After Blake retreated to his own table across the restaurant, Ryan sat back in his chair with a tight smile. "That was interesting." "He's just a client," Natalie said quickly, though she wasn't sure why she felt defensive. Well, not exactly a client. The gallery I work for sometimes handles private sales. The Blake Montgomery, Ryan said, emphasizing the name. You didn't mention you knew him. I don't, not really. We had one conversation months ago. Natalie picked up her wine glass, needing something to do with her hands. Ryan studied her face for a moment. He seems very interested in you. My professional expertise, Natalie corrected, but even as she said it, she remembered the way Blake had looked at her. There had been something beyond professional interest in his eyes. The dessert arrived. But the easy atmosphere of their evening had evaporated. Ryan made conversation about an upcoming trial, but Natalie could feel him watching her whenever she glanced away. And despite her best efforts not to, she found her eyes drifting to Blake's table. He sat alone, reading something on his phone while waiting for his meal. Even from across the room, there was something magnetic about him. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, the quiet intensity that seemed to surround him like an invisible force field. A difficult decision, 20 minutes later. As Ryan paid the check, Natalie excused herself to the restroom. She needed a moment to collect her thoughts and shake off the strange energy that had settled over their table. The restaurant's powder room was elegant and mercifully empty. Natalie stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror, taking in her flushed cheeks and bright eyes. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and her green dress brought out the color of her eyes. She looked pretty tonight, she had to admit. But more than that, she looked alive in a way she hadn't felt in months. When she emerged, she found Ryan waiting in the hallway, his expression serious. "Natalie, I like you," he said directly. "I think we could have something good together. But I need to know if you're really interested or if you're just going through the motions." The honesty caught her off guard. Ryan deserved better than half her attention. "You're a wonderful person," Natalie began, and watched him wince slightly at the words every man dreads. "But I think maybe we want different things." "I'm sorry." To his credit, Ryan nodded with dignity. "I appreciate your honesty. Can I at least drive you home?" "I'll catch a cab," Natalie said gently. "But thank you for a lovely evening." They parted with an awkward hug, and Natalie felt relief mixed with guilt as she watched Ryan leave through the restaurant's front entrance. She pulled out her phone to call for a ride, then hesitated. Blake's business card was still in her purse. The proposal, Ms. Brooks. Natalie turned to find Blake standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Up close, she noticed details she'd missed before. The slight silver at his temples, the intensity of his blue eyes, the way his expensive suit couldn't quite hide the athletic build beneath. "Your date left," he observed. "Well, some things run their course quickly." Natalie lifted her chin, refusing to feel embarrassed. Blake stepped closer, and Natalie caught a hint of his cologne, something subtle and woodsy. "I meant what I said about wanting to discuss a project with you. Would you join me for coffee? Just 30 minutes of your time." Every rational part of Natalie's brain screamed that this was a bad idea. Blake Montgomery was way out of her league, and men like him didn't randomly approach women in restaurants unless they wanted something. But there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability beneath the confidence. That made her curious. 30 minutes, she agreed. Blake's smile transformed his face, making him look younger and less intimidating. "There's a cafe 2 blocks from here. Best coffee in Boston, and it's open late." Coffee and confessions. The October night was crisp as they walked side by side through Boston's streets. Blake didn't try to make small talk, which Natalie appreciated. When they reached the cafe, a cozy spot with mismatched furniture and walls covered in local artwork, Blake held the door open for her. 2 coffees, please," Blake told the barista, then looked at Natalie. "Unless you prefer something else?" "Coffee is perfect." They settled into a corner table, away from the handful of other late-night customers. Blake wrapped his hands around his cup, and Natalie noticed he wore no wedding ring. Not that it mattered, she reminded herself. "I'm opening a private museum," Blake said without preamble. "A space dedicated to emerging artists who need exposure but can't afford the traditional gallery system. I want it to be beautiful, meaningful, and accessible to everyone, not just wealthy collectors." Natalie felt her heart rate increase. This was exactly the kind of project she'd dreamed about since graduating from art school. "That sounds amazing. I want you to curate it." The words hung in the air between them. Natalie set down her coffee cup carefully. Sure, she'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? Be the curator. Choose the artists. Design the exhibitions. Make it into something special. Blake leaned forward, his eyes intense. I've been researching curators for months. Your work at the Harrison Gallery is impressive. But more than that, you have a gift for seeing potential in artists before anyone else does. That's rare. Too good to be true. Natalie's mind raced. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of position that could define a career. But it felt too sudden, too perfect. Why me? She asked. There are dozens of curators in Boston with more experience, better connections. Because when we talked at that auction, you spoke about art with genuine passion. You weren't trying to impress me or sell me anything. You just loved what you were talking about. Blake paused, his expression softening. And because I trust my instincts about people, usually, the last word carried weight. Hinting at stories Natalie didn't know. I need to think about it, she said carefully. Of course. Blake pulled out his phone. What's your number? I'll send you the details. The location, budget, timeline. Take a week to decide. Natalie rattled off her number, watching as Blake typed it into his contacts. His fingers moved quickly, confidently, like everything else about him. Can I ask you something? Natalie said suddenly. Anything. Why were you really at that restaurant tonight? Blake's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. For a moment, Natalie thought he wouldn't answer. Then he smiled slightly, a sad edge to it. 'Cause I eat alone most nights, and that restaurant has the best view in the city. He met her eyes. Though I'm very glad I chose tonight to go there. The sincerity in his voice made Natalie's breath catch. This wasn't a line or a smooth bit of charm. This was honesty, raw and unexpected. I should go, Natalie said. Though part of her wanted to stay, to keep talking with this complicated man who'd just offered her everything she'd ever wanted professionally. Let me drive you home, Blake offered. I'll take a cab, please. Blake stood as she did. It's late, and I'd feel better knowing you got home safely. Against her better judgment, Natalie agreed. The drive home Blake's car was exactly what she expected. Sleek, expensive, and probably cost more than she made in a year. But he drove carefully through Boston's streets. Following her directions to the modest apartment she shared with Jade in Cambridge. Thank you for considering my offer, Blake said as he pulled up outside her building. And I'm sorry if I complicated your evening. You didn't, Natalie assured him, then reconsidered. Well, maybe you did, but it's okay. Blake smiled, and Natalie felt that flutter in her chest again. Call me this week, even if it's just to tell me no. Natalie nodded and reached for the door handle. But before she could open it, Blake spoke again. Natalie, that guy tonight, Ryan? He seemed nice. He was. He is. But not right for you. It wasn't a question, and Natalie found herself nodding. No, not right for me. Good, Blake said softly. Then, seeming to realize how that sounded, he added quickly, I mean, good that you're honest with yourself about what you want. Natalie climbed out of the car, then leaned back in through the window. The museum project. I'm interested. Very interested. Blake's face lit up. Really? Really? Send me those details tomorrow. As she walked to her apartment door, Natalie could feel Blake watching her. When she turned to wave, he was still there. His expression unreadable in the dim trelliture. Inside, she found Jade waiting on their worn couch, a knowing smile on her face. So, Jade said, how was your date with Ryan? Natalie collapsed beside her friend, pulling a pillow onto her lap. Interesting. Very, very interesting. And as she told Jade about Blake Montgomery's unexpected proposal, Natalie realized her quiet. Comfortable life was about to become very complicated indeed. Morning after revelations, Natalie woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the smell of fresh coffee. For a moment, she thought she'd dreamed the entire previous evening. Then she saw Blake's business card sitting on her nightstand, and reality came flooding back. She grabbed her phone and found 3 missed calls from her mother and a text from Jade. Coffee is ready. We need to talk about last night. In the kitchen, Jade sat at their small dining table, 2 steaming mugs waiting. Her best friend since college, Jade worked as a financial analyst and had a talent for seeing through situations with brutal clarity. "Okay," Jade said as Natalie sat down. "Walk me through this again?" "Blake Montgomery, the Blake Montgomery, wants you to curate his private museum?" That's what he said. Natalie wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "He just happened to show up at the restaurant where you were on a date with Ryan? He said he eats there often because of the view." Jade raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Girl, that man was not there for the view. At least, not the view of the harbor."
Ellie.
Felt her cheeks warm. "You think he was following me? I think he's been interested in you since that charity auction, and last night, he finally made his move." Jade took a sip of her coffee. "The question is, what are his real intentions? Maybe he genuinely wants a good curator. Or maybe he wants something else and is using the job as bait." Jade's expression softened. "I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying be careful. Men with that much money and power don't do anything without multiple angles." The email's if on cue, Natalie's phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was Blake Montgomery, and the subject line read, "Museum Project Details." Natalie opened it with trembling fingers. The email was professional and thorough, outlining a vision that took her breath away. The museum would be housed in a renovated warehouse in the Seaport District with 3 floors of exhibition space. The budget was generous, but not excessive. Clearly designed to support artists rather than indulge in unnecessary luxury. But it was the mission statement that made Natalie's heart race. To provide a platform for artists whose voices deserve to be heard, regardless of their connections or financial resources. To remind people that art isn't just for the wealthy, it's for everyone. "What does it say?" Jade asked, watching Natalie's face. "It says he means it. This isn't some vanity project." Natalie scrolled through the attached architectural plans. "Jade, this could be incredible. Then why do you look worried?" Natalie set down her phone. "Because what if I fail? What if I'm not good enough for this? And what if you're right about him having other intentions?" "Those are all valid concerns," Jade admitted. But since when did Natalie Brooks let fear stop her from going after what she wanted? The call, that afternoon, after hours of overthinking, Natalie called Blake's number. He answered on the second ring. "Natalie, I was hoping you'd call today." His voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. "I read the email. The project is amazing, but you have concerns."
"How did you know?"
"Because you're smart enough to have concerns." She could hear the smile in Blake's voice. "Can we meet? I'd like to address them in person." They arranged to meet at the warehouse that would become the museum. Blake offered to send a car, but Natalie insisted on taking the subway. She needed the time to prepare herself, to remember that this was about work, not about the way her stomach flipped when she thought about seeing him again. The warehouse, the building, was even better in person than in the photos. Located right on the waterfront, it had massive windows that flooded the space with natural light. The exposed brick walls and high ceilings gave it character. While still providing a blank canvas for transformation, Blake was waiting inside, wearing jeans and a dark sweater that made him look less like a billionaire and more like a normal person. Almost. "What do you think?" he asked as Natalie walked slowly through the space. "It's perfect." She turned in a circle, already imagining exhibitions. "The light is incredible, and the layout allows for both large installations and intimate viewing spaces." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Blake moved to stand beside her. "The architects can start work as soon as you approve the plans. I want your input on everything." Natalie turned to face him. "Why is this so important to you? You could invest in a dozen other projects that would give you better returns." Blake was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Can I show you something?" Blake's secret, he led her to a corner of the warehouse where he'd set up a makeshift office. On a folding table sat a laptop and several framed photographs. Blake picked up one of the frames and handed it to Natalie. The photo showed a young boy, maybe 10 years old, standing proudly beside a lopsided clay sculpture. The boy's face was alight with joy and accomplishment. "That's me," Blake said quietly. At a free art program in the neighborhood where I grew up, my family didn't have money for lessons or supplies. But that program gave me 3 hours a week where I could create something. Be something other than the poor kid wearing hand-me-down clothes. Natalie looked from the photo to Blake's face. Seeing him in an entirely new light, I wasn't talented, Blake continued. My sculptures were terrible, actually. But it didn't matter. What mattered was having a space where I could try, where someone believed I had something worth expressing. Took the photo back, setting it down gently. This museum is my way of creating that space for other people. You grew up poor? Natalie hadn't meant to sound so surprised, but Blake didn't seem offended. My dad worked 3 jobs. My mom cleaned houses. Blake leaned against the table. When I started my first tech company, I promised myself that if I ever had the resources, I'd pay forward what that art program gave me. A dangerous chemistry. The vulnerability in his confession made Natalie's chest tighten. This wasn't the smooth billionaire from last night. This was someone real, someone with a history and heart. I'll do it, she said. I'll curate your museum. Blake's face broke into a genuine smile. Really? Really? But I have conditions. Name them. Complete creative control over exhibitions. No interference from donors or board members who think they know better than I do about art. Done. And this has to be professional. Whatever else might be between us, this project is too important to complicate with personal feelings. Blake's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. Whatever else might be between us. Natalie felt her courage wavering, but pushed forward. I'm not naive, Blake. I feel the attraction too. But I've worked too hard to build my career to risk it for a relationship that probably wouldn't work anyway. Why wouldn't it work? Blake's voice was soft, dangerous. Because you're you and I'm me. We live in different worlds. Blake stepped closer, close enough that Natalie could feel the heat radiating from his body. What if I don't care about different worlds? What if I just care about finding someone who sees me as more than a bank account or a business opportunity? Blake. His name came out as barely a whisper. I'm not asking you to make any decisions about us right now, he said. I'm just asking you not to close the door before we even see what might be possible. Enter Harrison Colby, for Natalie could respond. The warehouse door opened, and a man walked in. He was shorter than Blake, with sandy hair and an easy smile. Wearing a suit that marked him as another member of the wealthy elite. Ick. You didn't tell me we had a beautiful visitor? The man said, his eyes appraising Natalie with friendly interest. Blake's jaw tightened slightly. Harrison Cole. Meet Natalie Brooks. Natalie Harrison is my business partner, and unfortunately, my best friend. Harrison laughed and extended his hand to Natalie. Don't let him fool you. He loves me. So, you're the curator Blake hasn't stopped talking about for the past 12 hours. 12 hours? Natalie glanced at Blake, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Called me at midnight last night, going on about this brilliant woman he'd met and how she was perfect for the museum project. Harrison's grin widened. Though I suspect the museum wasn't the only thing on his mind. Harrison, Blake said warningly. What? I'm just stating facts. Harrison turned back to Natalie. Fair warning, Blake is terrible at separating his professional and personal lives. If you're going to work with him, you should know that up front. Complications arise. Atlee spent the next 2 hours with Blake and Harrison, discussing timelines, budgets, and logistics. Harrison was charming and funny, clearly protective of Blake while also enjoying making him uncomfortable with pointed comments about his sudden interest in the art world. As the sun began to set, casting orange light through the warehouse windows, Natalie gathered her things to leave. I'll walk you out, Blake offered. Outside. The October air had turned cold, and Natalie pulled her jacket tighter. Blake stood close, blocking the wind without seeming to realize he was doing it. Thank you for trusting me with this, Natalie said. Thank you for saying yes. Blake hesitated, then added, Harrison was right, you know. I am terrible at keeping things separate. So I want to be honest with you. Natalie's heart began to race. Okay. I didn't go to that restaurant by accident last night. I knew you'd be there. How? I may have called your gallery and asked your assistant which nights you usually had plans. Blake looked almost sheepish. It's not as creepy as it sounds. It's pretty creepy, Natalie said. But she was smiling, despite herself. I know. But I'd been trying to work up the courage to contact you for months, and I kept finding excuses not to. When I heard you might be dating someone seriously, I panicked. You, Blake Montgomery, who negotiates billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat? Billion-dollar deals don't make my hands shake. Blake held up his hands, and Natalie could see the slight tremor. You do. The confession hung between them in the cooling air. Natalie knew she should step back, should maintain the professional boundaries she'd insisted on. But instead, she found herself moving closer. This is a really bad idea, she whispered. The worst, Blake agreed, his eyes dropping to her lips. We should keep things professional, absolutely. Neither of them moved away. The space between them seemed to crackle with electricity. With all the possibility and danger of what they were dancing around, then Natalie's phone rang, shattering the moment. She pulled it out to see her mother's number flashing. I should take this, she said reluctantly. Blake nodded and stepped back, giving her space. Call me tomorrow? We need to discuss the contractor interviews. I will. As Natalie walked toward the subway station. Answering her mother's questions about work and life, she couldn't help glancing back. Blake still stood outside the warehouse, watching her go. His expression unreadable in the fading light. The warning that night. Jade found Natalie sitting on their couch, staring at nothing. You've got it bad, Jade observed. Settling beside her, I don't know what I've got, Natalie admitted. Every logical part of my brain says to keep this strictly professional. But Jade, when I'm with him, everything feels different. Brighter somehow. It's called attraction, honey. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, is when it could ruin the biggest opportunity of my career. Jade was quiet for a moment. Can I give you some advice? Please. Stop trying to control everything. Yes, getting involved with Blake is risky. But so is living your whole life afraid to take chances. Jade squeezed Natalie's hand. You're always so careful, so focused on building your career the right way. Maybe it's time to let yourself want something just because you want it, not because it makes sense. Patricia Montgomery, the following week, passed in a blur of meetings, contractor interviews, and late-night phone calls with Blake that started about work and ended with them talking about everything else. Natalie learned that Blake loved old movies, hated olives, and had a collection of terrible jokes that somehow became endearing when he told them with complete seriousness. She also learned that he was kind to everyone, from the contractors to the coffee shop barista, and that he listened when people spoke with genuine interest rather than just waiting for his turn too. It was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain professional boundaries when every interaction made her like him more. Then, one Thursday afternoon, Natalie received a call from an unknown number. Ms. Brooks, this is Patricia Montgomery. I believe you're working with my son on his museum project. Blake's mother. He'd mentioned her briefly, always with a mixture of love and exasperation. Yes, Mrs. Montgomery. It's nice to speak with you, but I'd like to meet you. Today, if possible. There are some matters we should discuss before this project goes any further. The tone was polite, but carried an undercurrent that made Natalie's stomach drop. Of course. Where would you like to meet? The meeting Patricia Montgomery had chosen an exclusive restaurant in Beacon Hill, the kind of place where Natalie felt underdressed despite wearing her best blazer. Blake's mother sat at a corner table, her posture perfect, her designer suit impeccable. She was beautiful in a severe way, with Blake's blue eyes, but none of his warmth. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Patricia said as Natalie sat down. I won't waste your time with pleasantries. I want to discuss your relationship with my son. Our professional relationship, Natalie clarified carefully. Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Is that what we're calling it? Ms. Brooks, I've done my research on you. You're talented, I'll give you that. But you're also exactly the type of woman Blake tends to get distracted by. Distracted. Blake has a tendency to become infatuated with projects, whether they're business ventures or people. Patricia sipped her water delicately. He throws himself in completely, convinced that this time will be different, and then reality sets in. Natalie felt anger rising in her chest. With all due respect, Mrs. Montgomery, Blake is a grown man who can make his own decisions. Of course he can. But as his mother, I've watched him make those decisions, and I've seen the consequences. Patricia leaned forward slightly. Blake's father left us when he was young. I worked myself nearly to death to give Blake opportunities. And now that he's successful, I won't stand by and watch him throw it away on inappropriate relationships. Inappropriate how? You're an employee. You come from a different background. And most importantly, you're a distraction from the empire he's built. Patricia's voice softened slightly, almost sympathetic. I'm not trying to be cruel, Ms. Brooks. I'm trying to protect my son from making a mistake that could cost him everything. Standing her ground, Natalie took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. Mrs. Montgomery, I understand that you want to protect Blake, but he's not a child who needs protection from the world. He's an incredible man who happens to care deeply about making a positive impact. And you think you're part of that positive impact? I think the museum is part of that impact. As for anything personal between Blake and me, that's not your decision to make. Or mine, honestly. It's his. Patricia studied Natalie for a long moment. You have more spine than I expected. But spine doesn't change facts. Blake's world is complicated in ways you can't imagine. The demands, the scrutiny, the constant judgment. Women have been pursuing him for years, and he's turned them all down. Do you know why? Because he hasn't found the right person. Because he's terrified of ending up like his father, making choices based on emotion rather than logic. Think about what I've said, Ms. Brooks. Ask yourself if you're really prepared for what being with Blake would mean. And ask yourself if you're willing to risk your career and his reputation for a relationship that will likely end the way all his relationships end. After Patricia left, Natalie sat alone at the table, her hands shaking slightly. Part of her wanted to call Blake immediately and tell him about the meeting, but another part wondered if Patricia was right. Was she in over her head? The confession that evening, Blake showed up at Natalie's apartment unannounced. Jade answered the door, took one look at his face, and silently pointed him toward Natalie's bedroom. He found her sitting on her bed, surrounded by museum planning documents, her eyes red from crying. My mother called you, Blake said. It wasn't a question. Natalie nodded. How did you know? Because I know my mother, and I know she wouldn't be able to resist interfering. Blake sat on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain some distance. What did she say? That I'm not right for your world. That you have a pattern of getting distracted by inappropriate relationships. That I'm going to ruin everything you've built. Natalie's voice broke slightly. And maybe she's right. She's not right. Blake's voice was fierce. Natalie, look at me. She did, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. My mother is scared, Blake said. She's scared that if I let myself care about someone, I'll become vulnerable. And in her mind, vulnerability equals weakness. He moved closer, but she's wrong. Being with you doesn't make me weaker. It makes me want to be better. Blake, we barely know each other. Then let's change that. Have dinner with me. Not as your boss or as a business contact. As a man who can't stop thinking about you? Blake reached for her hand. I know this is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why we should keep things professional. But Natalie, I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. The kiss. Natalie looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. Everything Patricia had said echoed in her mind. The risks, the complications, the potential for disaster. But then she looked up at Blake's face, at the vulnerability and hope she saw there, and made a decision. Okay, she whispered. Okay, have dinner with me. Not as my boss, not as a business contact. As a man I can't stop thinking about either. Blake's smile was like sunrise. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Tomorrow night? Tomorrow night. They sat there for a moment, hands clasped, the future uncertain but suddenly full of possibility. Then Blake stood, pulling Natalie up with him. "I should go," he said. "Let you get some rest." Natalie walked him to the door, acutely aware that Jade had made herself scarce. In the hallway, Blake turned back. "Natalie." "Yes, thank you for giving us a chance." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Natalie didn't pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, their lips meeting in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow night can't come soon enough," he murmured, after he left. Natalie leaned against the closed door, her heart racing. Jade appeared from the kitchen, grinning. "So, how was it?" "Terrifying," Natalie admitted. "And perfect." But as she got ready for bed that night, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia Montgomery's warnings were just the beginning of the complications ahead. The perfect date Friday. Evening arrived with a mix of excitement and nerves that had Natalie changing outfits 3 times. She finally settled on a deep green dress that Jade insisted made her look stunning without trying too hard. Blake picked her up at 7, driving himself rather than sending a car. He wore dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking devastatingly handsome and slightly nervous. "You look beautiful," he said when she opened the door. "Clean up pretty well yourself." The restaurant Blake had chosen was intimate and elegant, but not pretentious. They sat at a corner table, and for the first time Natalie let herself relax completely in his presence. "Tell me something nobody knows about you," Blake said over appetizers. "Like what?" "Anything. Something real." Natalie thought for a moment. "I used to want to be an artist myself. Not a curator, an actual painter. But I wasn't good enough. And instead of accepting that gracefully, I convinced myself I never wanted it in the first place." Blake reached across the table, taking her hand. "That must have hurt." "It did." "Still does sometimes." Natalie squeezed his fingers. "Your turn." "Something nobody knows about Blake Montgomery. I'm terrified of disappointing people." Blake's voice was quiet. "Every decision I make, every business move, I'm thinking about all the people counting on me. Employees, investors, my mother. It's exhausting, pretending I always know what I'm doing." The honesty in his confession made Natalie's chest ache. "You don't have to pretend with me. I'm starting to realize that." They talked through dinner about everything and nothing. Blake made her laugh with stories about disastrous early business meetings. Natalie shared her worst experiences with difficult artists and demanding collectors. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by lingering looks and accidental touches that sent electricity through both of them. A shadow from the pasta's desert arrived as Blake's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. "Everything okay?" Natalie asked. "I need to take this." "I'm sorry." Blake stood, moving toward the restaurant's entrance as he answered the call. Through the window, Natalie could see him pacing, his free hand running through his hair in obvious agitation. After several minutes, he returned to the table, his jaw tight. "That was Harrison," Blake said. "There's been a development with the museum project." "What kind of development?" Blake hesitated, clearly debating how much to share. "Someone leaked our plans to the press. There's an article coming out tomorrow questioning whether this is a genuine, philanthropic effort or a tax shelter disguised as charity." Natalie felt her stomach drop. "Who would do that?" "I have an idea." Blake's voice was cold in a way she'd never heard before. "And if I'm right, things are about to get complicated." Enter Olivia Grant. The article appeared Saturday morning, accompanied by a photo that made Natalie's blood run cold. It showed Blake with a stunning blonde woman, their heads close together, clearly taken at some recent event. The caption read, "Montgomery and former fiancée Olivia Grant, photographed together last month. Sources say Grant has returned to Boston after 3 years abroad." Fiancé? The word hit Natalie like a physical blow. Blake called within an hour of the article's publication. "I'm coming over. We need to talk." He arrived looking haggard, like he hadn't slept. Jade, reading the situation, grabbed her keys and announced she had errands to run, leaving them alone. "You were engaged," Natalie said without preamble. 3 years ago?" It ended badly. Blake ran his hands through his hair. Olivia wanted the lifestyle, the access to wealth and power. She didn't want me, the actual person. When I realized that, I ended it, and now she's back. And now she's back. Blake moved toward Natalie, stopping just short of touching her. Natalie, whatever Olivia is planning, it doesn't change how I feel about you. Does she know about the museum? About me? Blake's silence was answer enough. The confrontation Monday morning. Talia arrived at the warehouse to find a woman waiting outside. She was even more beautiful in person than in the photos. With perfect features and an air of confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege. "You must be Natalie Brooks," the woman said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Olivia Grant." Natalie shook her hand warily. "What can I do for you?" "Actually, I'm here to do something for you." A warning, woman to woman. Olivia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Blake has a pattern. He fixates on projects, on people, pours everything into them for a few months, and then he gets bored and moves on." "That's not true, isn't it?" "He was the same way with me at first. Intense, devoted, promising we'd build a life together. Then reality set in." Olivia stepped closer. "You seem nice, Natalie. Too nice to be used as Blake's latest distraction. I think you should leave." "I will. But think about this. Blake is opening this museum to prove something to himself, to his mother, to the world. Once that need is satisfied, what happens to you? The woman who was convenient while he played philanthropist?" Blake's defense Natalie was still shaken when Blake arrived an hour later. He took one look at her face, and his expression darkened. "Olivia was here. How did you know?" "Because I know Olivia. She can't stand the thought of me being happy with someone else." Blake pulled Natalie into his arms. "Whatever she said, it's not true. She said you have a pattern, that you get intense about things and then lose interest. That's not fair." Blake's voice was tight. "Yes, I ended our engagement. But it was because I realized she didn't actually love me. She loved the idea of being married to someone wealthy and successful." Natalie pulled back to look at his face. "And how do you know I'm different?" "Because you tried to keep things professional. Because you worry about the artists and the mission, not about what dating me could do for your career." Blake cupped her face in his hands. "Because when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never did with Olivia." The museum opening, despite the drama, work on the museum continued. Natalie threw herself into curating the opening exhibition, selecting emerging artists whose work deserved attention. Blake worked alongside her, offering input but trusting her vision. 3 weeks later, the night before the opening, they stood together in the completed space. The transformation was stunning. What had been an empty warehouse was now a gallery filled with light and possibility. "You did it," Blake said, his arm around Natalie's waist. "This is everything I hoped it would be." "We did it," Natalie corrected. "This was always a partnership." Blake turned her to face him, his expression serious. "I love you." The words hung in the air between them. Natalie's heart raced, but she couldn't make herself say it back. Not yet, not with all the uncertainty still surrounding them. Blake saw her hesitation and smiled sadly. "You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know." Opening night chaos, the museum opening was packed with press, art critics, and wealthy collectors. Natalie moved through the crowd, answering questions and introducing artists to potential buyers. She'd never felt more proud or more terrified. Blake stood near the entrance, greeting guests with his characteristic charm. And beside him, despite not being invited, stood Olivia Grant. Her hand possessively on his arm, Natalie watched them from across the room, feeling something crack inside her chest. Harrison appeared at her elbow. "She crashed the party," Harrison said. "Blake tried to get her to leave, but she's threatening to make a scene if he forces the issue." "It's fine," Natalie said. "Though it wasn't fine at all. No, it's not." Harrison turned her to face him. "Blake loves you, Natalie. Really loves you? I've known him for 15 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "Then why is he standing there with his ex-fiancée?" "Because he's trying to protect you from bad publicity. Because he's an idiot who thinks he can control everything." Harrison squeezed her shoulder. "Don't let Olivia win by assuming the worst." The revelation an hour into the event, Blake stepped to the microphone to give his opening speech. Natalie stood near the back, trying to focus on the success of the evening rather than the beautiful blonde woman standing front and center. 3 years ago, Blake began, someone told me that money couldn't buy happiness, but it could buy choices. And they were right. Tonight represents a choice I made to use my resources to amplify voices that deserve to be heard. He paused, his eyes finding Natalie's across the crowded room. But this museum represents something else too. It represents what happens when you let someone truly talented have complete creative freedom. Natalie Brooks, our curator, took my vague ideas and turned them into something beautiful and meaningful. She did that because she cares deeply about art and artists. Not because of anything I offered her professionally or personally. The crowd turned to look at Natalie, and she felt her cheeks flush. There have been questions about my motivations for this project, Blake continued, his voice hardening slightly. Accusations that this is about tax benefits or publicity. Let me be clear. This museum exists because I believe art has the power to change lives. Just like it changed mine when I was a kid who desperately needed somewhere to belong. He clicked to a slide showing the photo Natalie had seen in the warehouse. The young Blake with his lopsided sculpture. I'm opening this space because everyone deserves what that art program gave me. Hope, community, and the chance to create something meaningful. Blake's eyes returned to Natalie. And I'm standing here tonight because someone believed in that vision enough to make it real. Even when doing so complicated her life considerably. Olivia's last move after the speech, as guests mingled and admired the art. Olivia cornered Natalie near one of the installations. That was quite the declaration, Olivia said. Blake always did know how to work a crowd. Do you want Olivia? I want you to understand something. Olivia's perfect facade cracked slightly. Blake and I were together for 4 years. 4 years of building a life, making plans, creating a future. And he threw it all away because I wasn't quite perfect enough for his impossible standards. That's not what happened, isn't it? Blake wants someone who loves him for himself, not his money. But the truth is, you can't separate those things. His wealth is part of who he is, whether he likes it or not. Olivia's eyes were suddenly sad. I did love him, you know? I still do. But it wasn't enough because I couldn't pretend his money didn't matter. For the first time, Natalie felt something other than animosity toward Olivia. She saw a woman who'd loved Blake in her own flawed way and lost him anyway. I'm sorry that happened to you, Natalie said genuinely. But Blake and I, that's different. Is it? Or are you just better at hiding your motivations? Olivia studied her face. I hope for your sake that you really do love him. Because if Blake ever thinks you're using him, he'll cut you out of his life so completely. It'll be like you never existed. The choice after the guests left and the museum was quiet. Natalie found Blake standing alone in front of one of the installations. It was a series of portraits by a young artist from South Boston. Raw and honest and heartbreaking. Your mother was right about one thing, Natalie said, making Blake turn. Your world is complicated in ways I can't fully understand. Blake's face fell. Are you ending this? No. I'm saying I understand now why you're so guarded, why trust is hard for you. Natalie moved closer. And I'm saying that despite all the complications and the drama and the ex-fiancés who show up uninvited, I'm choosing you, Natalie. Her name came out as a breath of relief. I love you, Blake. Not your money or your connections or what you can do for my career. You, the man who gets nervous before speeches and saves photos from his childhood and wants to make the world better in small, meaningful ways. Blake crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with all the pent-up emotion of the past few weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Say it again, he whispered. I love you. Again. I love you. Blake Montgomery. Blake smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. I love you too. More than I thought I could love anyone. 6 months later, the museum's first anniversary was celebrated with a new exhibition, featuring artists whose careers had been launched by their initial showing. Natalie stood in her office, now properly furnished and feeling like home. Reviewing the press coverage, Blake appeared in the doorway, 2 coffee cups in hand. Thought you could use a break? Perfect timing. Natalie accepted the cup, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at her. Some things never got old. I have something for you, Blake said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Natalie's heart skipped. Blake, it's not what you think. Well, it is, but not right now. He opened the box to reveal a key. The penthouse next to mine just went on the market. I thought maybe you'd want your own space, but close enough that I can cook you breakfast every morning.